I've learned that if you just smile before the live starts, then the still, like before
it catches that face.
It catches the face. So instead of like this,
which is my face is always.
What's going on with that video?
On my thumbnail.
Good morning, Happy New Year for the people who are watching us on Facebook. The rest of you, we've seen enough already this year, so I don't have to say Happy New Year to you guys. Today I want to talk about something because it's the beginning of the new year that I actually haven't talked about in our church yet, and we're coming up on a year next month, and I just feel like it's something that I originally was shying away from, but then I realized it's not for the benefit of my church to shy away from it, because this is something that all of us really need to understand so that we can benefit from it. And I'm talking about giving today. So I know that it's not like a popular topic, that some people kind of get put off on that subject, but I was just thinking about, like, if you don't teach your kids something, they're never going to be able to learn that and walk that out for themselves. And you can probably come up with a dozen examples of things that kids learn from their parents, and then they mimic their parents, and then eventually they get to a place in their life where they just naturally do it themselves. And so maybe an example would be like teaching your kid to be a servant, and to not be so selfish, because the Bible says that kids, when they're born just rebellious, and discipline over the course of time, which is instruction and correction from your parents, leads them away from that. And so if you take that concept, for example, of you teach your kid to be a servant, initially it's not coming from their heart, right? It's more just something that you're trying to instill in them, and you're trying to teach them to just be obedient to that topic, or to that action of serving. But then they see you serving, and now they're familiar with that, and now they serve because they see their parents serving. And then when they get to an older age, they, from themselves, now in their heart, they've learned what it is, they've seen it in action, and now they can just kind of walk that out themselves. And that's where God wants us to be when it comes to giving. But if we never talk about giving, if we've never heard about giving, if we don't really understand giving, how can we get to that point where we're giving cheerfully, or we're giving as we purpose in our heart? Because it's not something we're familiar with, right? So I'm just trying to use that example of, like, kids need to learn something, and eventually they'll get to a point where they do it just naturally from the goodness of their heart, but they had to learn it first. And so I originally just felt like it was something I didn't really want to talk about much in church, but then I realized, I'm like, there's so many benefits to us individually when we get to that point in our lives where we give cheerfully, or we give as God's purposing in our hearts, but it's something we have to learn first. And so I just kind of am saying all that to help you guys understand why I'm talking about it. So, and this is more of a discussion. In our house, Jesse handles the finances, and so I'm covering it because I'm the pastor, and I can try to help explain what it's saying, but it's not just for me to talk about it. So
what's funny is that this morning I was like, I need to tithe. I bet Johnny's going to talk on giving today. I should give it before I come, because I don't want him to say that I gave because he's mad about it. So funny, that's why we got it. Oh yeah, you got your tithe this morning.
Wow, sister.
But honestly,
it's really good.
First of all, let me just say this. I don't have any, like, when you give, I don't know. She knows.
Okay. No, I forgot to tell him.
So I usually try to tell him when you're giving. So this isn't prompted from
No, I know it wasn't, but it was funny because I was like, I bet Johnny's going to talk on giving today for some reason.
I think the thing is that it's been, like, this last 2 months have been amazing in that I'm being humble in this. But really, like, we've seen the benefits of us being always faithfully, cheerfully giving, no matter what, man.
No matter how hard you guys have had a hard time, I can testify that every 2 weeks, hell or high water, you guys give to the prison ministry, and I'm telling you, it's why.
But the benefits,
benefits for them.
Yes,
you benefit those prisoners and all their families. And look how God sees you sowing into them. He's gonna sow into you. That's the gospel truth.
Yeah. So
look at him doing it. Sorry.
And he does. That's what I was gonna say. Like
Yeah.
not that we give for that reason. We don't give for that reason. I know you're gonna explain that further, but I'm just saying, like, the fact that we give faithfully and that we've been able to stand on that and be like, look at what we've gotten because of that. Not because of that, but like because of that. You'll explain it.
And I just want to establish, for foundation purposes, that this is something that we as a church now can follow. It's not like, because this argument comes up a lot, like, well, tithing is like under the Old Testament and the Levitical priesthood, and that's where they talked about tithing and giving. Paul talked so much about giving. He talked about giving all the time. And so I just want to establish a foundation for us as a church so we all know that it's something that we can follow for our benefit, but also the Bible said that it's better to give than it is to receive. And I know that it may not seem that way, but truthfully, it's better for you because of all the rewards that you reap from having a giving heart. So in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7, it says, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap." So we're learning that the principle of sowing and reaping. Whatever you sow is what you're going to reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. Let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not lose heart. So just like somebody can't expect, if you're a farmer and you have a field and you don't put any seeds in that field, you can't go at harvest time and expect to be a harvest if you put nothing in the ground, right? So here we're talking about the natural and the spiritual. That's what they're essentially saying. So you can't expect to reap something in your flesh, reap something naturally, if you've never put any work into it, you know. And so we use the example of farming because it's such an easy analogy for us to understand. Likewise, you can't expect to be reaping all this spiritual fruit if you're not putting any seed into it, right? And so this is just, again, I'm just sharing, like reading this one to help us understand that if you want to reap spiritual blessings, then you have to put some seed into that. You got to sow something in that for yourself to receive something in return. And so again, I think number one, people don't really understand that, but that's why you use that example. Like, it would be stupid and crazy for a farmer to go out to his field and say, "Where's my harvest?" when he's never put a single stinking seed in the ground, right? Well, it's the same thing with the spiritual. If you want to see these spiritual blessings happen in your life, you got to put some seed into it. You got to put some work into that. And I think sometimes we get disappointed because we want to see things right away. And I've seen and I've heard a lot of testimonies about instantly people being blessed when they were in a time of need, like they gave and then right away they received something. And I think it really speaks more to the heart that they were giving with. Like, they gave out of cheerfulness, out of willingness, and they were blessed. But sometimes you're going to have to go through that process just like you go in the natural, where you sow something and then there's time and then a harvest. And even here it says in verse 9, "Let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we will reap a harvest if we do not lose heart." And so I think sometimes we get disappointed because we're doing things that we think we're supposed to be doing. We're sowing, but we're not seeing the benefits yet. But it's a promise to us that it says, "Do not grow weary while doing good, for in due season you will reap a harvest if you don't lose heart." And so for you, Ma, as you're heading out to Texas for this month, you have to stand on that promise. Like, you have sowed into us, into prisons all throughout Florida, all throughout Texas. And I don't know why I'm getting emotional about it. It's so weird, but you just have to stand on that promise that your season is coming, and you just don't lose heart. And so that's just one example of giving. But Paul in Corinthians talked a lot about it. And so in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, he talks about this in more length. And I think it's funny that Paul, he said all these things, but he's essentially saying, I'm not trying to make this as a rule. It's not a commandment. I'm just more just telling you these things. Why? For your benefit. And so he said in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 8, I speak not by commandment, but I am testing the sincerity of your heart by the diligence of others. For you know that the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that you through his poverty might become rich. And so he starts that off before he even says everything else. Like, listen, it's not a commandment. I'm not speaking this as a commandment, but I'm just letting you know that this is how it should be. And it says in verse 10, and this I give advice. It is to your advantage not only to be doing what you began and were desiring to do a year ago, but now you must also complete the doing of it. That as there was a readiness to desire it, so also may be a completion out of what you have. So I think the most important thing, he's talking about the church here in Corinthians giving to the churches, the poorer churches, and a cheerfulness to give. And so again, if you guys want to add something, you can to it, because it's not an area that I'm like the strongest in, but I know it's something that as a church we have to talk about. Therefore, going into chapter 9, again he's saying in verse 2, for I know your willingness. Again, the willingness, there's a desire and a willingness for them to give. And verse 5, therefore I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren to go to you ahead of time and prepare your generous gift beforehand, which you had previously promised, that it may be ready as a matter of generosity and not as a grudging obligation. But this I say, he who sows sparingly will reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So this is the benefit for the church. It's not for my benefit. It's not for the benefit of the church, my house church, Leesburg. It's the benefit for the members of the church, because it's a biblical law, a spiritual law. He who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. He who sows bountifully will reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. And so again, we have to get to a point in our lives where we're giving out of cheerfulness. And Jesse and I all the time, if we're giving an offering, usually it's somewhere where we have a desire to give. And so it's not, I'm not talking about tithe, I'm talking about the additional things that we feel like God is leading us to do. But again, it always comes from that place of like, we have a desire. It's not, no one's trying to convince us of it. No one's trying to like force it down our throats. We just feel like, okay, this ministry, whatever it is, we feel like we want to give an offering to them, and that's what we do. It comes from a willingness and a desire within us to do it. But if you don't learn about the subject of giving, you got to go through that process just like a kid does when it comes to serving. They've got to learn the concept of serving. They've got to see it in action. And then eventually they'll get to a point where they do it of themselves. The same thing goes with giving. If you don't know about giving, then you're not going to be able to really understand it, and it's not going to be something that you're going to be able to act on. And so like I said in verse 6, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. These are promises that God has for us. And so sometimes you can look at a verse and you can focus on the negative and say, oh, well, sowing, you're trying to say that if I sow sparingly, I'm going to reap sparingly. But look at the positive. He who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So if you're expecting to see a harvest, then you have to check your heart and say, am I sowing as much as I'm expecting to receive? Or am I the farmer who's going to go out to my fields at harvest time and I've done no work and expect to see a harvest, and now I'm mad at God because I've got no harvest? Well, have you been doing anything to sow into that? Because if you haven't, then that's on you, because it says, whatever a man sows, that he reaps. That's a biblical law. And so Paul's talking about that here, and he talks about it in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 as well. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 7, he says, Whoever goes to war at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat of its fruit? Who tends to a flock and does not drink of the milk? Do I say these things as a mere man, or does not the law say the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Is it the oxen God is concerned about, or does he say altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. If we have sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things? And you have to really read that to get the context of it. But he continues to say in verse 13, Do you not know that those who minister the holy things eat of the things of the temple, and those who serve at the altar partake of the offerings at the altar? Even so the Lord commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. But again, if you look every time he talks about this, he kind of finishes it off by saying, I preach this gospel, I present the gospel without charge, that I may not abuse my authority in the gospel. And in 2 Corinthians 9, he says, in verse 5, at the end, that it may be ready as a matter of generosity and not a matter of obligation. He continues to say, when he's talking about giving, nevertheless, I make the gospel free of charge, because I don't want to hinder the gospel from accomplishing what it's supposed to, which is to bring people to Jesus. But at the same time, he's letting these churches know, listen, we've been given this ministry of sharing the word with people, and even today. And it's for your benefit as a church that you give, because when you sow, you can expect that you're going to receive from that. But at the same time, your heart has to be in it. And that's why he was saying, the Lord loves a cheerful giver. You don't want to give out of obligation or begrudgingly. It has to come from within you. But there's a lot of benefits to you as a church in your giving. And so it's not the easiest subject to cover. It's not the most encouraging thing for people to hear, but it's important. It's a foundational thing that as believers we need to understand. And I've just felt okay, this is something that we haven't talked about as a church, but it's a foundational thing for us that we just need to understand. If you want to add something, you can.
Well, I mean, the thing that you said, if we concentrate on the positive, if you give bountifully, then you're going to reap bountifully. That, if you believe God's word and you believe He keeps His promises and it's true, it's an obvious step of faith you have to take. But when are we going to get a blessing if we don't take a step of faith? And that's exciting. If I sow generously, I'm going to reap generously. Yeah. So and you say the spiritual blessings. Well, Jesus, whenever He blesses us, whenever the Spirit, the invisible Spirit blesses us, it always manifests in the flesh. Mm-hmm. If He blesses us with healing, we're healthy. Blesses us with the unseen makes us seen. The unseen God who created the things that we see and can touch. So it's encouraging if we really get the concept that, in the Proverbs it says, we scatter to our increase. The right hand doesn't even know what the left hand is doing. We're just so used to giving, it becomes a habit if we keep doing it. And there's been times I'm I can't really afford to do this month, and I don't want to do it, like you're saying, but my heart of just obedience is in it. I want to do it because I know it's right, and I know it's gonna, if I show up for God every month, He's gonna show up for me every month. Mm-hmm. So even though we may not feel oh gosh, that's a lot this month, to give to this one ministry, every single comes out of your paycheck or whatever, your bank account, you still want to at some level. You want to just be consistent, and you want to be faithful, because if you are, that if we're faithful, He's also faithful. He's faithful to those who are faithful. So that was kind of backwards.
And I forgot to read the verse before in Galatians 6. I read verse 7 where it talks about whatever man sows, that he will also reap. In verse 6, it says, let him who is taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches. So even there, like sometimes we're questioning whether or not this is something that we should be doing, but Paul is saying it over and over again all throughout his writings that this is something important. And you can take this beyond finances, because I've talked with Jessie, I really want to find more friends, just because she's my best friend, and I'm not ashamed to say that. But then I was convicted by this, because if I want friends, am I being a friend? I need to sow friendship if I want to reap friends. And so you can take this concept of sowing, reaping beyond finances. You can take it into relationships, into
I remember
anything.
Sierra used to say she would babysit for people. She's not like a super kid person, but she was like, I'm sowing into my future for when I have kids, somebody's going to babysit for me.
Yeah, honestly. And that concept of sowing and reaping is for everything.
Yeah.
It's not just for finances. But again, I feel like it's important for us as a church to understand that it is something that we should be doing, but you should be doing it from a cheerful and willing heart. So even like Julie's saying, he's going to talk about giving, so I don't want to give afterwards, because why? Because it feels like, okay, someone compelled you into doing it. But there's benefits to us. So if we want to continue to reap spiritual blessings and we want to reap bountifully, then there's something that we should be doing. We should be giving.
Yeah. And why does he give us? Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say my favorite take on, Andrew's so good on finances and stewardship. He had that guy come up to him and said, I'm just, it was so under the law. The whole tithe 10% thing is whatever. That's not what Paul preaches.
Yeah.
And so he goes, I just 10% is just so much of my income. It's just a lot. He goes, then don't give 10% anymore. Just give what you want to give. So he started $5, or he'd give a tiny percentage, and he started being so not 10%, way less than 10%, and he started getting really prosperous in his business and kind of forgetting about it. And he was giving, but not 10%. And he went and stopped and looked back at his records, and he realized that he had prospered so much, and he was giving way more than 10%.
Yeah.
And Andrew said, stop being so legalistic and it's not a law. It's a thing of your heart.
Yeah.
Think about it. If your bank account is really suffering and you don't have any money, and your kid, think about your kids, how much you love. If they need something and they're desperate, or something happened and you not you have to bail them out of jail or a hospital, but something happened horrible or something and you can rescue it with money. You can fix it with money. You will find a way to get the money. Why? Because you love them.
Yeah.
So I think we say we can't afford it, but we go to Starbucks every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even that's and this is a silly thing, but it was one of our coworkers, some family issues, and she's in school working full time and has kids and now taking care of her mom, blah blah blah, and they're doing a meal train, and we're trying to buckle down on our budget, but also just being but we still need to be generous, because it's just sowing into people, also showing love, showing, and this is someone that sometimes, I just wonder, what they believe and stuff. So even just being it's, and then I was oh my gosh, I need to sow into all my family too, all their, I need to make meals for everybody.
Oh my God. And then we're all okay, but that's, now you're just.
No, I know.
She doesn't even cook for me, but then she's going to cook for all these other people.
That's exactly, Jesse and Johnny were probably
Joey, you don't need
wow,
to
she's
tonight.
making dinner for this family, and then I was Joey's probably thinking, and then I was oh my gosh, I didn't make anything for Courtney when she had her baby. Oh my gosh, I didn't make anything for, and then I was oh my gosh, okay, I'm just gonna make this meal and I'm not gonna think about it anymore.
Yeah.
Only you.
I'm whatever. I know I love giving. I know I try to help people, and I tithe and do all this stuff. I'm you also have to.
Sometimes you get in the household.
Babe, you know how much I do.
I'm just kidding. You do a lot at home, baby.
Because it's not just about cooking.
She's constantly doing stuff in the house.
From the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed.
It's true. Because I like cooking anyway, so I can't really say much about that.
But it's funny how you can apply it to everything.
Yes.
You can apply it to everything.
And the thing is that people are scared to talk about it because it sounds like, oh, you're asking, like, as a pastor, it's hard. But
There's been so
the
much
thing is
abuse.
that it's crazy is that to me, it's like, I remember the first time I heard the message, because I had always learned the way that, you know, where you give $1 in the little bucket and that's it. And then you're like, you give what you have in your purse. Like, like if you have $1 or $2 and you feel good about yourself, but it never, I was always like, I hated doing that. I hate when people give me, like, here, so you can give. Don't give me so I can give.
See, that's why
It's bothered me all my life. And so when I heard that message of giving, I was like, okay, I want to understand this more. And I remember listening to Jesse Duplantis on it, to Andrew on it, and I was like, okay, I'm getting it. I'm understanding what it's about. But more than that, it was like, and people are also not just scared to preach about giving, but also about the benefits of giving. Like, it's like, it's not okay for you to realize that there's benefits in you giving. Like, all the things, but it talks about all the different benefits that he does. Like, you know, that he's gonna rebuke the devourer for your sake. He's gonna, all these things that you could go after, like, given it will be given to you. So many things, and then actually seeing it, and actually seeing that every time that we faithfully, so then it gives people hope, because it's like, okay, I'm not giving, and I'm gonna be left, like, hopeless with nothing because I'm giving. Yeah. God's like, no, I want you to give, because then guess what? I'll give you more to give more, and also to take care of you in every need. And every time, like, literally, it doesn't make sense sometimes. Like, I'm like, people would think that it was crazy that we do this every month, when sometimes we've been like, okay, we're gonna need, like, especially recently, like, that was a big thing. Like, we took a huge step of faith, but it never even occurred to, and I promise you, I'm not saying this to, like to be, like, but I'm just saying, because you've got to tell the truth. Like, it never occurred to me, like, the kids, because this is what I've been teaching the kids. Like, it's never occurred to me to be like, oh, there's that money that I need to touch. It's always been like, that's not a touchable money. And it's funny, because we were remember that conversation about the investing? And I was like, I can't invest. Because I already don't.
But that guy, but you know what? That person, he invested, and he gave, he tithed.
But that's what I'm saying. Yeah, yes.
And then he had more than enough.
But that's
But
investing in the kingdom.
But that's what I was saying. I told Julie, like, well, I have to remember that my investing into the kingdom is investing, and that I do have just like a return that anybody that invests has. That's our harvest. Like, we have to believe there's a harvest for our return.
But the problem is that
that's how God works.
You don't
He's
meditate on those things.
But all of that reminds me of that verse that's like, if the birds have what they need, if this it comes back to you don't even have to worry. You do what God has called you to do, and you don't have to worry about anything else. Yep. Like, you're gonna have everything you need. So even that, remembering that verse, like, on top of giving, like, it's like you don't have to worry about it. You just do what you're supposed to do.
To me, it's been like, but I mean, it's funny how you forget, because whenever we moved out of my mom's house, that was the impossible, like,
oh my gosh,
coming up with that amount of money, that was impossible, but we did it back then, but then we had forgotten about that.
We
got to a point now where we were like, we had the income, you know, Johnny's been working his stuff, doing his, and then all of a sudden, he's like, okay, I have to take a step of faith and drop the other income and just take this and keep this. And I had to remind myself of that situation where it was impossible, and be like, okay, it's impossible, but God will cover us.
Says, don't lose
and
heart.
He's not only covered us every month, but covered us an extra every single month. Where I'm like, I have no idea. Like, if you looked up my bills, you would not understand.
Yeah.
And then when you see the incoming, you're like, why all this incoming that you didn't have to, like, do anything for? And then it reminds me, because when you sow seeds, you get a harvest. That's what you have to believe. I think that's something that I've always struggled with. Like, I've understood sowing seed, but I've never understood the harvest. Like, really believe the harvest is there.
Believe in the harvest.
But that's not true. That's not, then that wouldn't be biblical. That's not how God teaches it.
And in order for sowing and reaping to work, you have to have first, before you can plant the seeds of money, or the seeds of whatever you plant, love, whatever, you have to have the faith to do it.
Yeah.
And so that comes from the Word of God.
Yes.
And use our kids for an example. Like, Lucy for math, and for math, I say Lucy did real estate, but the truth is, she did George and Gloria on finances, and pretty much on giving. And that girl, I mean, she's got inheritances, more than one. She's always had tons of money. She's always in the flow. She's very generous. She's always been a giver, always. I remember she went and did those things where you test products and you make, like, she made like 80 bucks. And she came out running out to this girl I was discipling, and gave her $10. I'm like, she's like, what? This little kid coming out and giving her, I just want to send one to your ministry. And she's been doing that. And then look at Sophia, Liam, those kids are loaded, your kids.
Yeah.
Because I've been telling, but since they were tiny wee little kids, they've been giving their youth pastor, bring me $20, you're 8. How is this 10% or whatever? Or probably way more than. And
You're
then
like,
kids
do you
are
have
loaded.
$200? And they're like, yes, I do.
Or they probably have 100 and they're giving 20. Like they've always been givers, and they're really like well off little kids. They can buy whatever they want, and they're really prosperous. And that's because you guys have taught your kids from little how to do that, and it works. And they take steps of faith. They have no problem giving $20 because they know they're going to get a harvest from it.
And I think what you said and what she was saying together, like you have to have faith, but then there's times where I don't meditate on the promises that come along with giving. Like you have to actively remind yourself that there's blessings because of what you're doing. And so I feel like you're saying,
Because then it helps
you're
you
investing
expect
into the kingdom. Why aren't you expecting to have a return on your investment? Because it's a promise that it's there.
Yeah.
He gives us the power to get wealth to establish his covenant. So he's giving us to be able to help other people.
And he gives
And
seed
there's
to
giving.
sowers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if he sees you're a sower consistently, that's the person he's gonna give that gift to. And other men will give into your bosom. That'll come from.
And I think that's the difference of what some people are scared of teaching is like you give so that you can get, but they don't realize you give so you can get to give.
Yeah, heck yeah, I give to get.
And but the point
it's
is
the
your
right
heart
motive.
is your
I
heart
want to
is to
stop
give
kingdom,
exactly.
right?
So you get to give, and people get offended by that, but you give to get.
Yeah,
Then you get to give.
Yeah, you can do
And
more.
to do the cycle.
I know.
And he's taking care of your needs at the same time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it's like it comes back to the heart. It's your heart in it. So if your heart is, okay, God, you're going to continue to give me more. That's why I'm giving.
Yeah.
But your heart is also, I know that the more you give me, the more I'm going to sow into establishing your kingdom. Then that's good stewardship. So you're going to continue to increase and increase and increase because he's seeing that you're faithful with the seed that he's giving.
It's just funny. It always comes back to your heart.
Yeah.
Your heart and everything.
So I just wanted again to talk about it. You can tell that it makes people uncomfortable, and I know that it's not the easiest thing to talk about, but I want us to have a foundation, at least an understanding of giving and the importance to us and to God's kingdom. It's not just a personal benefit that you get. It's you in being a good steward of God's money that he's blessing you with can continue to establish the kingdom. And sometimes that hit me, even you saying that. Like I don't always think about the fact that you're investing into a prison ministry every single month, every single time you get paid. And so that's something that you're doing to help create change and to reach people. So there's a lot of benefits to giving. I think, like I said, we just need to have at least a foundation, an understanding of it, and this concept of sowing and reaping goes beyond just finances. It, for me, it was
you sow healing, you reap healing. You sow friendship, you reap friendship.
So, does anybody have questions? Because we're a small church and we can ask people if they have questions.